Are we ready?
We'll get the last shot.
So we've just come out of executive session for everybody who's watching, and now we're ready to do our public evaluation of our city manager, and Denise is going to lead this off for us.
Yes, and just to reintroduce myself, Denise Smith with Performance and Development and Human Resources, and I've been facilitating your annual process with the city manager around his performance feedback this year. And we did several surveys, both employees, community members. The city manager did a self-evaluation, and then each of the counselors, you individually, contributed to an overall summary. We've calculated, based on the contract, language around his compensation. That was part of your notebooks. And at this point in time, I'll turn it over to the council and the city manager for your discussion.
Thank you very much for your work on this. So, city manager,
Basically.
I'm just going to start this out by saying once again, I personally feel that we've had another good year, and appreciated your management. And I'm just going to run through a few things, and then we'll go around the table, okay? So I feel really very strongly that you have a good relationship internally and externally and throughout the community, and that matters a lot. I feel like you've worked very hard on goal achievements in accordance with what we've said we want to get done. I think your budget management, once again, very difficult. I think you've done a really good job. None of us feel totally satisfied by it because we are not in the situation we would like to be in. But given the situation everybody else is in, I feel pretty good about how well we're doing with the challenges that we face. I do feel that we're just on the precipice of dealing with those resource issues, and so whether it's public safety or human service issues or those things, that discussion is just beginning. I don't know how successful we're going to be at it. I look forward to trying to find some way to take some steps forward, but I can't say that I think we've made a whole lot of progress on that. I think that lies in front of us. I also wanted to comment on, I hope, and I think it's really hard to do this. It's really necessary to do it, but I think it's really hard to do it given how stretched thin we are. But I do think we need to continue to try to focus hard on the economic development aspect of our city, and for a number of years we really didn't do very much with that, and we put in the regional prosperity plan, and we've been trying to move in that direction, but I think we're in a place now where we have little bits of success, and we really need to hone in, and how we do that within our limited resources I think is going to be a challenge, but it's kind of the path out of here. So I'm just encouraging you hard to push us on internally, staff-wise, and getting your council back again. I know in the Portland area, sometimes one of the things that helps them do the big lift is when they get a lot of backing from council. When they step out, that they've got the power of the whole council behind them to take those big leaps. So I think that's something we ought to try to do. I think we've been really good at building partnerships, and I appreciate all the work on the triple bottom line. I'm going to go on past that. I appreciate the can-do attitude. I think for years we didn't really have we operated from a place of trepidation as opposed to we can figure out how to do this, and I really I think you've done masterful work with both staff and us in trying to get into that can-do kind of thing. I do think that we still can improve our police-community relationship, and I feel like one of the issues is that both the police force and the community should have confidence that we've got their backs, and how we give both of those entities confidence that through the council and through us to you and then down to the chief and so forth, that we do have the backs of our force and our community, and one is not does not jeopardize the other. It is the whole that we're interested in. And so that's pretty much what I'm going to start with right now. Pat, you want to
Mayor, can we
lead up?
just turn
Yes, let's just, no, you don't have to
for
time.
this? Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
I'm going to go around.
In order.
John, this was a pretty momentous year. A lot of big issues came up, and a lot of big issues that had come up in previous years were continued or brought to fruition this year. And I've told you individually, told you personally, that I really appreciate the type of leadership that you bring to the job. A very steady and predictable leadership, in that you give us the information that we need to make the tough decisions that we have to make. Sometimes we're critical of you. Most often it's because of something that I or we have failed to do to understand why you're presenting the information. And I use Envision Eugene as a particular example, in that it's easy to criticize you if we didn't follow the process from the beginning and go through the all of the steps of the process, to not understand why some of the things came about the way they did come about, and perhaps feel out of the loop a little bit. But you present the information in a very balanced fashion and allow us to make very good decisions. Going into detail, you have strong leaders on your team. I believe you create a great atmosphere in your leadership team, and I think that you have leaders who are willing to step forward under your leadership, under your executive leadership, and go beyond their means, or go beyond their comfort level to do a broad range of activities. I take Sarah as a particular example of someone who has a job and a job and a job and a job and performs them all outstandingly, and that couldn't be done without the extremely steady leadership that you're providing. And I could go down along a litany of people who are in that same situation. I think it's beautifully done. As a manager, you have a difficult time working with exempt employees and with union employees, and it's a balancing act that any manager has to perform, and I believe you do it as well as anyone I've ever seen do it, and I'm very pleased with the net results. Your integrity, community outreach, budget preparation, your staff leadership, innovation, implementation and follow through, and particularly your calmness under fire. That's not something that comes easily to very many people at all, and it's just exemplary. And I'm very proud to be and have been a part of a team that has worked with you. Thank you, John.
Thank you. I echo a great deal of what's been said already. I think that our community is fortunate to have you. I really mean that. I know Alan said that, and I think that we really are fortunate to have you at the helm of the ship with that. Particularly in a couple of places like what Pat said, where I have thought, well, there was an opening in one part of the city or another, and I thought, well, this person would be a great, in that role. Obviously, we don't get to do that. We don't get to say that. We don't get to participate in that. But I thought, wow, I think that would be a good person there. And then you would choose someone, and I would go, wow, that's an interesting choice. I'm not sure I would have made that, but okay. And it turns out that it was a brilliant choice. And as he put forward, Sarah coming from a different department, and I've been really amazed at the great work that she's done. So, your capacity to spot talent, your capacity to get the most from it is unmatched in the city's in the near recent future that I've watched. I mean, in the time I've had, I'm prone to hyperbole now and again, but in the time that I've been associated with the city, I've watched city managers. I think I've seen 6 Eugene city managers at work over the course of time. And not to take anything from them, several were very, very talented people and very good, but you've done the finest job I've seen so far. And I think, again, we're fortunate to have you.
Thanks.
George.
Just to kind of paraphrase John, what I said in the evaluation that I wrote, I think that your leadership skills is far above anything I've ever seen. And having worked for elected officials, I think that you've taken the city's staff to a different level. Granted, we're faced with some really tough economic times, but despite that, you've shown the leadership to instill the can-do attitude and to think outside the box, to get us to a point where we can do the same that we were doing, if not more, with less financial support. I think that's a great testament to your leadership abilities, and particularly the budget issue. I mean, you, I think, have shown the leadership more than anybody else by, setting the example, passing up your COLAs, passing up your previous merit increases, which obviously were due, and you obviously should be getting those. But that is just a prime example of how you set yourself as the leader. I'm particularly pleased with the way you reach out to not only your counterparts in the county and the city, but the department heads in some of the other jurisdictions, and meet with them on a regular basis. The economic development piece. I know my wife has regular meetings with you, being that she's in charge of the economic development division over at the county. So I know you're out there. You're making those contacts that perhaps we don't even know you're doing. Again, that shows your leadership and your willingness to do more for the city than just work for the city. Because by reaching out to the other communities, you're also making the entire region a better place. And the last thing is, I'm also really pleased with the way you're out in the community in non-governmental ways in your civic involvement, which again shows your commitment to this community. When you first came to work for the county, I was still at the airport at the time, and I'd see you flying out, and I was a little concerned because I knew we had picked a gem, and I was concerned because is he going to visit people or is he going to look elsewhere? Did we scare him off too soon? I'm glad you decided to stay. I'm pleased with what you're doing, and
especially with that gold boarding pass.
I just think that we as an organization, we as a city, are very fortunate to have you.
Chris?
Thanks. My comments are in my evaluation, and I'm sticking to them. But what I really want to talk about is how well this council and therefore this government and this community function under your thinking, how you approach things. For better or worse, this council does represent the community, and I think it reflects the community in its thinking and its philosophy and its approach to things as much as anything else. And when this council functions well, it's because we have the tools and we have the environment in order to be able to function well. And by association, that means our community functions better. Because if the diverse factions in our community can get along the way the diverse factions on the council can get along, then it means we're doing something right. And I think the degree to which we can work well together is a reflection of how your work, not just here, but in the community, has also helped it to work together. We got through an Envision Eugene process that, of course, it had its bumps, but compared to what it could have been for a project of its scope and magnitude, to me is nothing short of amazing. We've attempted similar kinds of things in the past, and they've been very controversial, for lack of a better word, and they have never really achieved great outcomes because they couldn't achieve great outcomes. And so your ability to grasp what this community is and what this community needs, and then to be able to effectively give it that, is not only reflected in the work we're able to get done, but also in how well the council, as a diverse and very different body, is able to get along and do its work. As Mike was saying, I've seen a lot of city managers also, and I think in terms of understanding the community and being able to get the best out of it under these trying times, you are doing an unbelievable job. You really are. And I point to the work we do as a council and say, yeah, we get some of the credit for that, but you also get a lot of the credit for being able to give us that environment in which we can do that. Yeah, we do get constrained occasionally, we do have some bumps along the way, but overall, I'm seeing a city government and a city council, and by association, a community that is functioning better than it has functioned for decades. And the conversations we're having and the things we're getting done, to me, are all the example you need for why I think that's very true. So, as everyone else has said, I can't thank you enough for the work you've done. I hope this relationship goes on for a long, long time because it's working really well. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Boy, I want to respond to Chris's comments about some stuff, but I'll just talk about John's evaluation. I didn't really write much because there's not much to write, John. I think every day you show us your level of commitment to this community and the work that you do. The only thing I really want to say is that you make us look good, and that is awesome. You know, because I think that, I know when I'm out in the community, people don't remember the city manager's name, but they remember their counselors' names. And, you know, those city councilors, you know, blah, blah, blah. And so, and I think that you've done a really good job in supporting us and making us look good, and I really appreciate that because I think that we work really hard, too, as a council, and not that you don't, but it just makes me feel supported, and I think that that's one of the things that I really appreciate. And I really do appreciate the work that your management team does, and all the city employees. I can't say that outside of negotiation times, you know, whenever I'm at the pool or in a park, or, you know, everybody from the guy that cuts grass to the front desk person at any of the city buildings, everybody is very professional and appears to be very happy of their employment. So, and that just speaks volumes to me. Thank you, John.
Alan?
So, John, I think you're doing an excellent job as well. And I think we're lucky to have you and have someone of your caliber and competence leading this city. I hope you stay for a long time, too. You have a very difficult job. You have 9 bosses, yet you manage all of it and you make it look easy. I think that's the hallmark of a consummate professional. And as Andrea said, you make us look good and you make our job easier. And I think that's one of the big parts of what a city manager is supposed to do. And the leadership and your can-do attitude and the desire to seek innovation, it permeates the entire culture of the organization. And I think it makes Eugene a better place because of that. And it raises the level of the staff work and the professionalism that we have throughout the organization. I think you've accomplished a lot. The stabilization of this last year, the stabilization of the budget, the plan to get ultimately there, we're not quite there yet, and the overall financial management is just excellent. On the way over here, on KLCC, the Talk of the Nation NPR program was about city bankruptcies. And then we're talking to the former city manager of Vallejo, the stuff that they went through, and we don't see that here because I think of your and your team's management of our finances and our budget, and that singly is enough. But there's so many more things. The communication with the council is excellent. All of our AISs are very clear, and we never get surprised, which I think is also makes us look good. The infrastructure, maintenance, and planning, especially the road repair, the road bond, the bike ped master plan, all excellent pieces of work. Leading the Vision Eugene and shepherding through all that difficult community politics, just outstanding job there. I give you kudos for starting the revenue discussion in the city. And I think that you've developed a culture of innovation, sustainability, stewardship, inclusion, and collaboration that's, I think, was missing in the city for a long time. More work to be done in that area, but I think that's something you should be proud of. Your executive management team is excellent. The number of people who got awards, we were just talking about that yesterday or Monday at the council, is just amazing. The level of that we get to have people operate here. I mean, a good example of your leadership is just the chair of the governor's transportation task force on the 10-year energy plan, which was just released. The governor tapped you because he saw what you were doing in your background. Olympic trials, the new website, keeping healthcare manageable, downtown development, and then and using the TBL as a basis for it. It's still waiting for that to be in the AIS on all of our things, and hopefully we'll get there this year. Maybe that could be one of your goals. So finally, handling Occupy Eugene and the follow-on communications and the work and the plans that we put in place and all that stuff, I think was, compared to the way other cities handled it, everybody goes, how'd you do that? And a good example of that was with the EPD and how and I know you were intricately involved in all of that. Hats off to EPD for the way that they handled all that, but your leadership and Pete's leadership on that was excellent. But having said that, I also think there's still a gap between the community, large parts of the community, not all of it, but large parts of the community and EPD in that relationship. And I think that's one of the areas where I think we should focus our attention, and you in particular should focus our attention. The Occupy Eugene was a good start, but I think more of that and strengthening that bond between the relationship between the community and EPD is something that we should probably work on together. But overall, just excellent job. I think we're lucky to have you. Thanks for the good work this year.
Council President George?
Thanks, Mayor. I'm just going to go down the various dimensions of our analysis and just make a couple general comments too. Dimension one is policy facilitation and management. I think generally it was successful, but I think it was inconsistent. I was very disappointed in the staff's, what I regard as staff's mishandling of the Capstone MUPTI process. I think it was disastrous, really. I think staff, there was a lack of due diligence on Capstone's past and current practices. That was left for counselors and residents to dig into the history of that company, and that's staff's job, really. Presentation to council of incomplete, inaccurate, and misleading information was an ongoing problem. Just regarding the size of the exemption, took a while to, how much is it? 16 million? No, it's 10.5. No, now it's 8.5. And now we don't know what it is because they don't own half of the property. We give them an exemption for the whole property. This is an ongoing problem, kind of like the gift that keeps on giving. There was no bad information about the pro forma return on investment, the phasing of the project, presence of lead. We still haven't seen the environmental analysis. I really think that's unforgivable. The residents and the business people in the surrounding area need to know that. There was a total lack of real tangible negotiations for really on the ground financial community benefits. Generally, it was, in my view, the whole process was plagued by a lack of transparency. And so we just had to keep fighting and asking questions to try to get the information to make our decision, and I just think it was not done very well at all, and I grade that particular project an F. I think it was substandard work. Overall, I think the policy facilitation and management is decent, though, so I think it's successful. But that was one of my one recommendation for the future would be to direct planning and development to spend more time examining other cities' policies too, especially regarding tax exemption programs and economic development policies. I'm not saying we shouldn't do those things. We need to do those things. I think we can do them a lot better. That's all I'm saying there. And to do that, we need to look for other good examples. Dimension 2, financial management, very good. Good sound performance. I think that you and Central Service did a really good job about crafting a budget that, it's painful. None of us liked it. But it's still going to allow for reasonable service delivery, and given our shrinking revenues, I think that was really a good job. Community participation, excellent, outstanding. The way you engage with the community and listen to everybody's concerns, all the stakeholders, I think is very commendable. And I think you and Chief Kearns did a great job dealing with Occupy homeless encampment. I know it was very challenging. It was whether we didn't have a playbook to follow. It just popped up, and it was spontaneous. it was unique, it was very challenging, and I think you and Chief and the police did a really good job there. Unfortunately, I think we, the city, I take responsibility for that too. We dropped the ball afterwards with the transition out, and I hope we can come up with something so we don't end up in a similar situation this next winter. Organizational leadership, good, really good. You work well with all the department heads and staff, and I like the way that everyone's remained positive in the face of this dreadful budget situation, shrinking revenues, and nobody's despairing of the future that I've talked to here at City Hall. I think that's great too. So overall, my overall rating is good, very good.
Thanks, George. So before I turn it over to you to make comments, City Manager, just a couple other comments I want to make is through you, I just want to say to you and your staff that I think they have continued to just do an amazing job of not a little sacrifice in trying to keep our city on a even course and to make us, in spite of all these challenges, feel good about ourselves. And I don't think that's an easy thing to do, so I'm saying this in this public arena to you, but I want it to be heard by our staff. I think we all want them to know that we see what they've been doing. We see what's been happening here, and we appreciate it. I also want to say, got brought up by one person, but I feel like it's worth repeating. I think you get the best from people who work for you if they really like you. And I feel like you really like our community, and I've heard people around the table say you get us, which is not a small thing, but I think it's not only that you get us, but that you kind of appreciate it and enjoy who we are as a community, and that makes your ability to do your job so much better, and our ability to work with you in governance of the city so much better. I think it's really difficult when people are fighting against the very entity that they're here to be managing and serving. So I just want to express my great appreciation for that. And the one thing that hasn't been brought up that I want to bring up, and even though I don't know all the ins and outs of it, I also want to say I really appreciate your leadership on the physical well-being of the people who work for us. You've really tried to lead everybody into more healthful living and exercise and all that kind of stuff, and I think that's a really important piece of the work for all of us, too. People who get the chance to do that work for us, can feel better and do the job better. So I just want to say I see that, and I acknowledge that. And so I think that's everything. Only thing I'll end up with as mayor is, for me, I feel somewhere between that you work for all of us, but I also feel like you've been a great partner, and I feel like we're even with all of our diversity, I think we all feel the best. I think Chris expressed this, Mike. We all feel the best when we feel like together we're accomplishing something for our community. We feel the best when we're able to achieve something and we can look at it and say, gosh, we did that together. And so I think we're doing more and more of that, even with all of our diversity. And I think that's a really healthy, good thing for our community. And I appreciate that you've been a really good partner in doing that. So now I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll just take a couple minutes. Thank you very much for your feedback. I appreciate that. And I just want to reassure all of you that Barb and I really do enjoy Eugene. We like this community for all the reasons that all of you like this community, and so it's a fabulous place to be. So I just want to reassure you of that. I also appreciate that you recognize the staff team quite a bit. As all of you know, that really is does the bulk of the work in this community from a city perspective are all the employees, the nearly 1,500 employees that are out there every day doing the work. And they, as you recognize, they do a fabulous job. And I also would compliment them in these really difficult economic times. We've asked them to work hard, we've asked them to sacrifice, we've also asked them to continue to think of new ways of doing things, and they do that. And they just go out there and really work hard at it. And that's very refreshing. That's not always the case in all organizations, so that makes a big difference. I too think that we have a really nice partnership between the elected officials, myself, and staff. And the staff feels respected. We feel like we are heard. We have no expectation that you will always agree with us. That's not our job, to ensure that you agree with us. Our job is to provide you with our best professional advice. And we take very seriously when you give us direction that we will implement that to the absolute best of our ability, regardless of whether or not that was our recommendation. I have heard some feedback about, are there ways that we can help with the framing of policy, bringing those conversations so all of you as elected officials can engage in those conversations as well, because that is important. And I do think that's important from a staff perspective, that you provide just really good, clear policy guidance to us, and we will go implement that. And so as we think about that, we'll continue to try to figure out ways to ensure that we're providing that kind of information. The other piece is it's fun. It really is. Mayor, you alluded to it. One of the nice things about this community is it is extremely diverse. All of you do represent those points of view, and or I should say, I think everybody's point of view in the community is represented somewhere in sort of the mix of council. I think that's real positive. And sometimes it can be frustrating, as you know, but overall it really is challenging and fun. And I do appreciate the tenor of the conversations that occur around this table. From a staff perspective, it makes it easier for us to be sort of at the table and providing all of that good guidance that you expect of us and should expect for us. So I look forward to this next year. I think it'll be a challenging year like we've done before, but I have no doubt that we'll get through it in a really good way, and so I look forward to that. So thank you for your feedback.
So now I think we're supposed to get into the compensation discussion, correct?
Actually, you don't have a discussion because it's in the contract.
It's
and
automatic.
Contract.
Oh, yeah.
It's automatic.
Good, done. Okay,
done.
Great.
You're good to go.
So we're good to go. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody around the table, and I want to thank you again, and thank Human Resources Department. Thank you so much for your work, and everybody who participated in the community as well. Alan?
Although, on the compensation, I just wanted to, we should acknowledge that the city manager went the COLA on a voluntary basis, even though he's entitled to it.
That's nothing. We made that big sacrifice.
Yes, ours was significant. His sacrifice.
Hopefully so. Part of the team.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll collect any notebooks that people don't.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mayor? I was just going to add that along the lines of what Alan said, not just for 1 year, but for several years in a row.
3 years.
The manager has foregone any form of rate increase, and I'm happy to see, COLA. I'm happy to see that happen.
Well, I just, in a really personal way, hope that the community can share in some way in how well functioning I think we all are right now in a very challenging time. So I'd say that as a compliment to you. I hope the larger community can feel that as well. I'm going to move on now to Our next item is the amendment to the Eugene sign code. We'll see how well we function on this one.
And now, the rubber meets the road.
Oh, and John, before we go into that, I had mentioned to the city manager, he's going to just, this is not going to be something we're going to discuss. I'm just wanted him to give you a little information because you know that the federal government has told the Occupy folks that it's time to leave the site, and I thought that you might be hearing from people about that, and maybe he should just give you a couple sentences of what's going on.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, for the opportunity to do that. As I've talked with the police chief, of course, they're monitoring it very closely and staying involved, staying in touch both with the Occupy Eugene folks as well as the federal services. And we believe very much that the federal services has the resources to work through it however they choose to work through that. Our intent is not to get involved over there other than to continually monitor. So that's what our intent is.
Thank you. That's the update. So we're avoiding a discussion if you have specific questions.
I do have a specific question, Mayor.
Okay.
So what is the city's role if the federal government comes to us and says that we need your support in a multi-jurisdictional effort to remove occupiers from the federal courthouse?
I'm not sure there's a legal answer. I'll have to have Pete in touch with you. What I do know is, from his perspective, they have the resources to meet that situation. And so we believe that to be true. So what I don't know specifically that I'll ask him is if there's some sort of a formal request, what is our responsibility to respond to that?
So just in layman's terms, what you're saying then is that the GSA has many feet on the street that can go in and clean that up or do whatever they're going to do without the involvement of local jurisdictions.
Correct. Okay. That's what we believe, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Because on the way over here, it sure didn't look like they were packing up to move. And the deadline's today?
3 o'clock.
So I expect that that's not going to be
Federal marshals work fast.
removal from that federal property.
I think what we've heard is,
I would.
I think what we've heard is they have policy of how they've done this in other places, and they will be expecting to apply the same policy here as they have throughout the country when it's been federal property.
It's their responsibility.
Yeah.
It's their responsibility.
As long as we're not involved, I'm okay.
All right, we're moving on to that non-controversial issue. Signs.
Signs, yeah. Sounds like federal
City manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll turn it over to Jerry, particularly in light of the time.
Mayor and Council, you initiated the process for amending the city sign code on May 29th. You will have a public hearing on the proposed amendments in 12 days at your regular public hearing session. You had asked for a work session before the public hearing, and my understanding was that the primary purpose for asking for this work session was to discuss the allowable size of the exempt signs. So before we get into the guts of it, I want to just refresh your memory about the background of this. Not quite a year ago, the city received a complaint from the ACLU suggesting that there were several parts of our sign code that are unconstitutional in their view, and two of those things were some of the exemptions in their view are content-based, and they were concerned that there was no fixed timeline in the sign code for the city to act on a permit application. Those are the two issues that we have addressed in the proposed amendments. I don't think there's any controversy about the piece that involves the time for the city to act on proposed, on permit applications. So the main issue is the exemptions, and the size of an exempt sign. And when I say exempt, that's exempt from permit requirements. And the exemptions that we proposed, 2 exempt signs for residential properties where there's a single-family dwelling or a duplex, and 1 for everywhere else. And the basic rationale underlying that is that we don't, in the current sign code, we don't really have provisions for a general, what you might call expressive sign, something other than the number of the building or a little plaque. We don't have provisions for those for residential properties. We do, with a permit, have those for commercial or industrial properties. So that's why the proposal is 2 signs on residential properties and 1 everywhere else. The current draft suggests 12 square feet for those exempt signs. Where did that come from? Under your current code, there is an exemption for signs during the election season. That's basically 4 months in every even-numbered year. And the size of those exempt signs is 12 square feet. So we started with 12 square feet. That was also a number that was acceptable to the ACLU. Staff has brought 3 sample signs, and they are posted there. The only thing I would say about viewing those signs is I know from experience when you look at them from here and you're 6 or 12 feet away, they look a lot bigger than they do if you're driving down the street and you're 30 or 40 feet away.
Pictures of them on the street.
We are going to see some pictures. As to size, in all of our discussions with ACLU, we have been clear that we don't think the Constitution flatly requires 12 square feet. I think the ACLU may feel that way. Not that there's a fixed number, but the size has to be or should be consistent with the purpose of having a sign on one's property or in one's yard. There is no clear standard. The city clearly is allowed to regulate signs in terms of size, number, and placement. The question is, how much do we regulate them in those terms? And that's a question where there is no clear line. I mean, some signage is subject to constitutional protection. Exactly how much, we don't have any fixed standards. And I think with that, I'm going to ask Catherine to refer to the signs, and I think she has a brief PowerPoint for you.
Hi, as Jerry said, I'm Catherine Kappa from the Planning and Development Department. And what we did to help with your discussion and understanding of this code amendment was to make these sample signs. The 12 square foot sign is 4 by 3, though 12 square foot could be in any dimension. The 9 square foot sign is 3 by 3, and the 6 square foot sign is 2 by 3. We're starting with, what we did is we went to 4 different residential properties in the city in 4 different neighborhoods, and we tried to pick lots with different sizes and street frontages and residential characters. We start in southeast Eugene. This is a cul-de-sac lot with 40 feet of street frontage, starting with 2 6 square foot signs. And just a note too, we did all these as the freestanding signs. The code as proposed would allow these signs to be 6 feet tall. None of these are 6 feet tall. And the minimum separation between the 2 signs would be required to be 8 feet. These are significantly more than 8. And the property owner could also choose to have, instead of one of the freestanding signs, they could choose to have a banner. This is the same lot with 9 square foot signs and with 12 square foot signs. Feel free to ask any questions if you want as we're going through. This next lot is in Jefferson West Side, it's got 54 feet of street frontage. That's 2 6-square-foot signs, 2 9-square-foot. You can see that they were a little tippy. It was hard to put them in some of the grass. And the 2 12-square-foot.
My friend used to live in that house.
Third neighborhood is Santa Clara. This is a 69-foot of street frontage lot with 2 6-square-foot signs. In this case, we did have the ability, because of the yard and the driveway placement, to be able to put them at 8 foot of separation. The other lots, we couldn't do that. There's the 2 9-square-foot and the 2 12. And the last lot is a Harlow neighborhood lot with 95 feet of street frontage. And there's 6-square-foot, 9, little wind hitting that one sign, and 12. And that's what we've got.
So just to reiterate what Jerry said at the beginning, the purpose of this work session is really to give you a chance to look at the signs, and if there are issues that you would like the public to comment on, other than just the draft ordinance as it is, to let us know what those are, and then in the AIS, we would highlight those issues as well and ask the public to comment to you during the public hearing. You know, do you like the 12-foot square sign? Do you like the 9-square-foot? Things like that. After the public hearing, having heard some of your conversation during John's evaluation and other things, our plan would be to actually have a follow-up work session for you in the fall, and then after that work session, to actually schedule it for action. So the purpose of today isn't to actually give us direction on to specific changes you would want for the ordinance, but instead give us what you would like the public to comment to you about during the public hearing, and then at the follow-up work session in the fall, to give us that kind of direction as to how you would want the ordinance changed, and we can change it at that point.
Okay, help me, I think you tried to tell me, maybe I didn't get it, but why 2 instead of 1?
I think that there are 2 reasons. One is, or maybe 3. One, if you start with these signs during elections model, we actually don't have any limits on the number of signs there. The second is, in residential neighborhoods, we don't have a provision for what I'm going to call loosely this kind of sign under a permit. If you're a commercial business, there are a whole range of different signs for which you can get a permit. We don't have that in a residential neighborhood. The third reason is, under our code, flags are signs. And we wanted to make sure that people had the opportunity to have both a flag and what we might call an expressive sign, a sign like this. So that's why 2.
I guess I still come down to I can't see the need to have 2 signs. One seems to say it perfectly well. The other is my question is, how big is a typical political sign?
1824.
They're smaller than that. Either any of these of the above, right?
They're 3 feet, 1824.
18 inches by 24 inches, yeah.
So that's a size sign that we are used to seeing plopped in people's lawns, or the political size sign. The ones that are larger for politics, we typically don't see in lawns. You may see them on a business, you may see them on a highway or something, but you rarely see one that large in somebody's yard. Just the typical sign, political sign in a yard is a typical smaller sign. Just my thoughts. I've got Alan, I've got Andrea, I've got George, and Mike.
I've been waiting
Pat.
all along there.
That was
Okay, well
before
then,
me, even. You're first before me.
you want to be first, Pat?
I just have a quick question. A 2-sided sign, is that 1 sign or 2 signs?
That's 1 sign.
Okay, that's all. take me off the queue.
So, Jerry, can you clarify the section on signs during elections? That's different. It seems like it's contradictory, but to the rest of the code, but it's different for election season, right? In that there's
No, it won't be anymore.
I'm not sure I know what, I'm not understanding what's the contradictory part.
oh, there's no limitation
That's correct.
on the number.
That's correct.
There is on size.
Correct.
No limitation on the number.
And
For that period, 60 days prior and 5 days after.
correct. And that's the way it is now, so we're not proposing to change that.
Right. Okay. I think we should, I'd like to see two changes to this. One's around being explicit about sidewalks and the size. On the sidewalks, the number one thing I hear about sign code violations is that people have put their signs, especially commercial, on the sidewalk. And ours is pretty clear that you can't have it in the right-of-way, but I don't think most people actually know that the right-of-way is the sidewalk. And I think we should just be explicit about that, including, and say, in the right-of-way, comma, including the sidewalk. Because when I say right-of-way, people go, it's kind of glaze over, I don't know what that means. So I think we should be explicit about saying sidewalks. The other one is about size. We have 3 different sizes in here. We got 12 feet, 3 feet, 6 feet, 3 feet. To me, I agree with you. The Constitution doesn't say thou shalt have no more than 12 square feet of signs. It doesn't say anything about the size. And so for me, the test is, does the sign limit the ability to convey the intended message? And I would like us to, and it's a trade-off between aesthetics, livability, visual pollution, if you will, and free speech and conveying that message. And I don't think any of these signs limit the messaging. For residential, I think 2 12-foot signs is way too big. I know that's our existing code, but we have this opportunity to change it, and I think we should. And most of the signs that we see are much smaller than 6 feet, and almost all of them, probably in the 90-something percentage, are that size during the political season anyway. So on the residential only, I would think that my preference would be to have it be no more than 6 square feet. You still have 2 of them, and I'd like to see that be in the code that goes out for public hearing, not as a change to it.
We can't
later.
do that because the code, because of the charter requirement for when we have to do notice, the ordinance is already posted and we can't change it between now and the public hearing. What we could do is have a second alternative version of the ordinance that's attached to the AIS if you want. I don't know how many people are actually going to look at the attachments, but we can certainly call out in the AIS, on the front of it, it's like, public, please comment on, the council said interested also in 6 square feet, so let us know whether, us meaning council, 6 square feet, 9 square feet, 12 square feet. But what we can't do is change the ordinance that's already been posted.
Yeah, okay. So how do you want us to convey, me saying it's fine, but it's not the majority of the council. Do you want to do a straw poll and some of these issues?
Does anybody have objections to us calling out in the AIS, public, please comment on whether you want 6 square feet, 9 square feet, 12 square feet?
Sure.
We'll do it.
Care about that.
And then, so then when we get, after the public hearing, then when we come back for the adoption is when we would make amendments to the...
Right, we'll schedule a work session for you, and at that work session, what we would hope you would do is pass motion saying, okay, direct us to change the ordinance so when we bring it back to you for final adoption, you'll have already voted on, you want it to be 6 or 9 or whatever. You'll still be able to change your mind when we bring it back to you for final adoption, but having a majority of the council say, here's what we'd like to see in the final ordinance, just makes it a lot cleaner.
Right. So I'd like to see us in residential, regardless of elections season, to have it be 6 square foot signs.
before I call on Andrea, my only comment is if you're going to ask the public their response to 12, 9, or 6, seems like you ought to have an other category.
Sure.
Andrew?
Thank you, Mayor. Just for the public, I want to call out that the ACLU, Dave Fedenke's in the room. I appreciate him taking time to be here at our work session. I don't have any heartburn around this because personally in my neighborhood, I live in a mixed-use neighborhood. So are these going to be, are these signs that you're putting forth, is there any zoning restrictions on them?
It is not, the proposal is not to do it by zone, but to do it by use of the property. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is it's a lot easier for citizens to know, is this a commercial use or am I a single-family residence or duplex? They don't have to look up their zoning. The other is that in recent years, the land use code has moved more and more to special area zones, and we didn't want to get in the position of needing to amend the sign part of the land use code every time we have a new special area zone. So it seemed just easier to do it by actual use.
So I guess to simplify my question, so your recommendation and what's in the code that's going to go forward for public hearing is including these level of signs for residential, not necessarily for, like my neighborhood, it's residential over here, and on this side it's light industry, and then you get down here, it's heavy industry, light industry, and residential. Is that correct?
Right. If it's a home on the property, you would get these signs, 2 signs.
Okay.
But if it's not a home or a duplex, you get one, but it's still the same size. I mean, the way it's drafted right now is the 12 square foot limitation applies whether the property has a single-family home or duplex on it, on the one hand, or something else. If it's single-family or a duplex, you get 2 of them. If it's something else, you get 1 of them.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Multifamily.
So
If it's-
my next
that would be
question
one.
is, are we going to be requiring permitting fees for residential?
No,
Okay, but businesses we will with these signs?
not for the one sign that's exempt.
Okay.
No fees, no permit.
Okay. I guess what I'd like to say is I'm really kind of undecided about this simply because of the areas that I do represent, and there is a lot of multi-use properties. I mean, whether they're zoned commercial or not, there's a lot of people that have cottage businesses, and I think about, I don't know how this is going to play into the, as we're looking at more infill and encouraging people to have that kind of business like along 8th where you work downstairs and you live up here, they need to be able to have the opportunity to advertise in some fashion, shape, way, or form, and so I don't know quite where I'm at on this. I do agree with Alan about the whole thing around things in the right-of-way and on the sidewalk. I mean, if you drive down Highway 99, there is every sign that is imaginable in the medium, not in the medium, on our side of the sidewalk, and I don't think that that's quite legal, but I'm not going to call in a complaint. That's all, Mayor.
Okay. George?
Me? I had basically the same question Andrew did about people that live and work in the same building. How are the sign codes? Is there going to be a separate section covering them? Or how will any changes apply to those type of situations?
For instance, if you have a home occupation,
Whether it be a
honestly, at the moment, I have forgotten.
I can answer that.
And Catherine may be able to answer that.
In the case of a home occupation, the primary use of the property is a single-family home. The home occupation is subsidiary to that, so it would be regulated as if it's developed with a single-family home. In the case, like in your neighborhood, Councilor Ortiz, where you've got some of the mixed-use zones where they may have an allowance to have residential on a ground floor and perhaps commercial uses that are unrelated to the home occupation, then it would not be. It would be treated as you get one exemption.
And as far as the number, I know there are some locations in the city where, in residential area, where people have access to a back fence that back up to a street. And there's plenty of room to put at least two of those 12-foot square, or two 12-foot square signs on their fence and not take up the aesthetics of the front yard. So I don't know about the number of signs and the size. I think that's something I'm going to wait till I hear at the public hearing what people are thinking about that.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. Two things. One, George just hit upon, which was that as somebody who occasionally works with a couple signs and campaigns, I can think of plenty of reasons why a yard would want to have two 12-foot signs. He just identified one of them, where you might have two access points that are completely separated, the front yard and a back fence, that are both important thoroughfares, and you want to be able to have a sign that faces each. But really, it's my experience that the size of the signs have more to do with the traffic on the road than the size or manner of the property or the house. It has to do with how much traffic is going by or what intersection it's at. If you have a residential home that's at a particularly busy intersection or thoroughfare, you might want to have two 12-foot signs because it's at the intersection of two very busy streets, and one faces one way and one faces the other. So there are plenty of reasons why. But number two, staff asked us, what do we want to hear from the public? And I guess what I would want to hear in any testimony would be if people want to make a distinction between sizes of signs that they think are appropriate or inappropriate, what I want to know is on what basis is it appropriate or inappropriate? I mean, is it just aesthetics? Do they like this size and they don't like that size? On what basis are they making that decision or that recommendation is what I really want to hear. Why do they like a bigger sign or don't, or the number of signs? That's how I want to hear their input.
George Brown?
Thanks, Mayor. I just have a couple questions to make sure I might not be understanding this totally. So flags are regarded as a sign.
Yes,
So you could have one, but no size limitation.
they would be,
Still be subject to the same limitation?
Yes.
Okay, so it could either be on a flagpole or maybe hanging from the front porch,
yes,
like a lot of people do. Then you could have one sign in the yard.
yes.
Okay. And then all of the political candidate and, ballot measure, all those kind of signs have to come down after the elections. That would not change? Could they, you could leave two of them up?
They can be up forever at this point.
Permanent.
They could be, to the extent you have more than two signs, on a residential property, the signs would have to come down after the election, yes. But if you had only one sign, vote for Councilor Brown, that could stay up indefinitely because it would still be one of your exempt residential signs. And we are
Permanent campaigns.
we are not in a position to, constitutionally, we can't say if it's a political sign, it gets different treatment than if it's a for sale sign or...
Yeah, all right, I understand that. So I think my last question for now, anyway, is that, so you can have your two exempt signs, and then you can have more political signs that have to come down after the election?
During the election season,
Have a whole
yes.
yard full of signs.
I don't mind.
But after the election, you only get to keep two of them. I mean, I don't think,
That,
but I mean,
all of those things,
I
yes.
don't think it's going to happen, but...
The number goes away for the election period.
Right, I see.
And the Councilor Brown, the piece that you just mentioned about signs during elections, you could have as many as you want. That's true today under current code.
I see.
So it doesn't happen very often.
That's
but
why I don't think...
that is,
Because it's not happening.
that's no change.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, I've got Chris, then George, then Ellen, and Pat.
This is a really interesting discussion. I mean, when you talk about signs, you're talking about what's the point of a sign. And the point of a sign, somebody wants to say something. And we're talking about size and placement and whether it's this kind or that kind. And I agree, we don't want to, the content is not the allowable subject right now. But what is the fact somebody wants to say something. And I think there's probably a 90-10 rule here, that 90% of the time what somebody wants to say, they're probably more than happy to say it in a polite 2x3 kind of way. But there will be 10% of the instances where somebody wants to really scream, and they're going to want to scream
All
in
caps.
a 12 square foot kind of way. And so the question is, what is our role in supporting people signing in a polite 2x3 way versus those folks that are feeling compelled to scream in a 3x4 way? And should we somehow inhibit the ability of somebody to scream in a 3x4 way and scream permanently? Because they can put up this sign and scream every day, 365 days of the year. And I'm challenged by the ability to deny them the right to scream, because screaming isn't polite, but it's not an issue of politeness, it's an issue of whether or not they're allowed to scream. And should they be allowed to scream in neighborhoods? It's like noise ordinances. I should be allowed to play my music. But when I play my music, when does it stop being me and when does it start being someone else's? You know, my freedom to swing my fist ends at your nose. And so what are the things governing that element? I don't want to unnecessarily inhibit free speech. But at the same time, I could envision a small but very strongly held group of people feeling compelled to scream 365 days of the year in their neighborhood. And what is the balance there that is effective? Does free speech require us to accommodate screamers, or can free speech be adequate to accommodate, not polite, it could be reasonable? What is that? So your notion of saying what might be in between. These are three options. Maybe there are other options. I'm really intrigued. I'm really interested in knowing what is the appropriate balance we need to strike. I don't want it to maybe say it's just polite. I want to be able to accommodate the occasional person who wants to scream, but how do you do that in an effective way?
George.
I've got a couple of questions about flags. Now, the definition is being deleted out of the code. Is that correct, of what a flag is?
Correct. That's the proposal.
So, I don't know if it's in Mike's ward or my ward, there's a house that flies the American flag and the Marine Corps flag. Every day I go by it, I see it. And I'm not sure of the size, but if they're 3x5 flags or bigger, that person would be in violation of the ordinance as proposed.
Yes.
Yes,
Currently, it's not, but it would be as proposed.
correct.
So if somebody wanted to get really
Persnickety.
go overboard and do a garrison flag, that definitely would be over because of the size. So then if you want to put up a POW flag, that gives you 3, or an Oregon Ducks flag, that'd give you a 3, because there is no definition of flag anymore other than your own personal idea. If it would have to remain, the combined 2 would have to remain under 12 or 9 or 6 square feet. Depending on where we land on, is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
I think that would be something that I would like to hear from the public also, as far as what is should that definition be removed or not?
So
Let me just comment on why the proposal is to remove the definition. That's one of the issues expressly raised by the ACLU. And when you have an exemption, as we do now in our code, for flags, their point is if you define that exemption by defining the term flag, if the only thing you can get under that exemption is a government flag, then you have discriminated between speech that favors the government and speech that favors Go Ducks. And that is a distinction based on content. And I know that's difficult to hear.
Okay.
That does, to put it this way, I reserve the right to argue to the contrary if we're in court, but the Oregon Constitution, the Oregon Supreme Court's interpretation of the Oregon Constitution does suggest that we would have a hard time defending that distinction.
Okay. So then, under the proposed ordinance, the house that I'm talking to, and Mike, I think you know, it's the one on
There's more than one
yeah,
of them.
anyway, they're on standard-looking flagpoles, and they're at least 3 by 5 or bigger, and there's 2 of them. So it would be, under the proposed changes, that would no longer be a legal display of those 2 flags because of their size and because of how high off the ground they are? Or is there going to be a limitation on how high up they can be?
That's correct.
It's got to be accommodated.
So, and if we were to amend the proposal for good reason, but to address that, then we would have the problem of, would we be okay with those standards if the flags, instead of being POW, MIA flags, or United States flags, if those flags said, "Go Ducks," or if they said, "Drink Pepsi," or "Eat at McDonald's." And that's the difficult question, is you can, if you expand the exemptions to allow more things, because we think of things we'd like to allow that, you also are going to end up allowing all those other uses. And that's what makes this a very difficult topic.
Okay, I've got Alan, Pat, Andrew, and Mike. Alan?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
So this is a complaint-driven process still. So we don't have staff running around
Correct.
there identifying. We never have. And so it'd still be complaint-driven. So your flagpole would have to be complained about, I suppose. And then the second comment, and Chris brought it up, is that in the residential areas where I favor limiting the size, I think we should think about this in the extreme case. In the extreme case, these signs are permanent. So if you think it's okay and in a constitutional right to have a 12 square foot sign permanently on your neighbor's yard, 2 of them forever, and that doesn't infringe on other kinds of rights like visual pollution and livability and other things, it's a trade-off. There's no clear answer about what size. To respond to Chris's, why 12? Why not 15 or 21?
Is arbitrary.
It's all arbitrary. So it gets down to, okay, where does it go to become reasonable? And that's where my standard, my test in my mind is, does it interfere with the messaging? And if it doesn't interfere with the messaging, then we can limit the size. I think a 6 square foot sign is sufficient to scream if you want. And so.
Pat?
Thanks. It seems there's no reasonable, clear answer to this at all. And, flying a U.S. flag that's 3 foot by 5, which I do, if that's illegal, that seems off base to me. But you're defining it by
Fun with that.
by ACLU and by court standards. The only thing I want to be clear about is that if somebody is flying a U.S. flag, an Oregon flag, they cannot put a "Go Huskies" sign in their yard. That's true. Right? that's all we need.
That's a violation.
That should be
Just
a
very
law.
quickly, Mayor, I know this conversation probably sounds anti-patriotic to some of the public out there, us discussing not having people have flagpoles, and we were very nice about what we said people might fly. Go drink Pepsi, but I think about the flag that was across the street from Train Song, which was the neo-Nazi sign, and those are the kind of things that I would be concerned about if we're opening the door to allow anybody to have any kind of a flag they want. Because I was sitting here thinking, well, maybe we should just just allow people to have flagpoles. But then I was thinking, well, if there's somebody who wants to put, a racist kind of flag up there, we would have no recourse with it. And I don't want to encourage that kind of behavior because that is alive in Oregon. So that's all.
Mike?
I wouldn't want to encourage that sort of behavior either, but I have trouble limiting even stuff that I find offensive most times, because for me, speech, and especially around political speech, I get a little bit. I think Dave and I probably agree a lot more than anybody might understand. My question is, can we exempt, or can we create a different standard for size, whether it's a sign or whether it's a flag?
Well, not a question.
you can create a different size if it's a sign, meaning